I thought office gossip was just harmless noise, until one story made my stomach drop. Have you ever heard something so wrong that everyone else around you just accepts it? Because what I found out about a coworker didn't just shock me. It made me question if I was the only one seeing something deeply messed up. I remember exactly where I was when it started to feel off. It was one of those ordinary afternoons at work, the kind where everything blends together, the hum of computers, the quiet tapping of keyboards, and the small clusters of coworkers chatting in low voices. I had been working at this company for about 2 years at that point, still relatively new, still figuring people out, still believing that most things were pretty straightforward, right and wrong, clear lines, simple values. And then there was A. A was part of our friend group at work. She was friendly, easy to talk to, the kind of person who could turn a dull lunch break into something entertaining. But there was always something underneath, something heavy, that she carried into almost every conversation. Her marriage. She had been married for about 2 years, but if you listened to her long enough, you'd think she was trapped in something much worse. She complained constantly, not just occasionally venting. This was almost every day. He doesn't understand me. He never does anything right. I don't even know why I married him. At first, I tried to be empathetic. I mean, relationships are complicated, right? Especially when you're young. People argue, people misunderstand each other. It's normal. I told myself that maybe she just needed someone to listen. But over time, it started to feel excessive. It wasn't just frustration. It was resentment. Almost like she had already given up, but instead of leaving, she stayed, just to point out everything that was wrong. And I remember thinking, quietly, to myself, if it's really that bad, why stay? I never said it out loud. I didn't feel like it was my place. But that question sat in the back of my mind, growing louder each time she complained. Still, nothing prepared me for what I found out next. It didn't come from her. It came from another coworker. We were sitting together during a break, just casually talking about random things, when somehow A's name came up. The tone shifted slightly, subtle but noticeable. That kind of shift where you can tell something is about to be said that isn't exactly light. And then she told me. Apparently, A had been involved in an affair. Not just any affair, with a married man, a man who had a wife and a child. And this wasn't something recent. It had been going on for 3 years. 3 years. I felt like the air around me just changed. At first, I thought maybe I heard it wrong. Maybe it was exaggerated. Maybe it was just office rumor. But the way she said it, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't exaggerated. It was calm, matter of fact. Like it was just something that happened. And then she added another detail. The man's wife had found out. And she had come to A's old workplace and caused a scene. That's why A had to change jobs. I just sat there staring at her, trying to process everything at once. The complaints about her husband, the bitterness, the frustration. And now, this. It didn't make sense to me. Or maybe it did, but in the worst possible way. What confused me even more was what came next. After telling me all of that, the coworker didn't seem judgmental. She didn't seem shocked. In fact, she seemed understanding. She even said something that stuck with me. You're still young. You probably won't understand. I remember blinking, almost instinctively. What does that even mean? Won't understand what? That having an affair with a married man for 3 years is understandable? That betraying your own marriage while criticizing your spouse is somehow relatable? I didn't know how to respond. I think I just laughed awkwardly. But inside, I felt completely disconnected from what I was hearing. Because from where I stood, it felt wrong. Not complicated, not gray, just wrong. And maybe that's where everything started to unravel for me. Not the story itself, but the reaction to it. Because it wasn't just that one coworker. As I paid more attention, I realized that others didn't seem particularly shocked either. No one openly defended it, but there was this quiet acceptance. Like it was just another messy adult situation that didn't need to be judged too harshly. And that made me question myself. I'm not someone with a lot of relationship experience. I've had maybe 1 or 2 innocent high school relationships. Nothing serious, nothing complicated. Since becoming an adult, I've actually never been in a real committed relationship. But I've always believed in certain things. Loyalty, honesty, basic boundaries. To me, those weren't negotiable. They weren't things you bend depending on circumstances. They were just the baseline. So hearing all of this, it didn't just shock me. It unsettled me. Because suddenly, I felt like I was the only one reacting the way I was. And I kept asking myself the same questions over and over again. Am I being too rigid? Am I seeing things in black and white when the real world is more complicated? Do people with more experience actually see this differently? Because if they do, what does that say about the world I'm stepping into? And the part that bothered me the most wasn't even the affair itself. It was the contradiction. How can someone maintain a secret relationship with a married man for years and still complain daily about their own spouse not being good enough? How can you demand emotional understanding from your partner while actively betraying them? That's the part I couldn't reconcile. And the more I thought about it, the more it stayed with me. Not as gossip, but as something deeper. A crack in how I thought people worked. Because if this was normal, then maybe I didn't understand people as well as I thought I did. And that realization, that was far more unsettling than the story itself. I tried to move on after that conversation. I really did. I went back to my desk, opened my laptop, and stared at the screen like everything was normal. But my mind just kept replaying it over and over again. The words, the tone, that calm, almost casual way my coworker had said it. 3 years, a married man, a wife, a child. And somehow, that wasn't the shocking part for everyone else. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about A. I started replaying every conversation I'd ever had with her, like I was trying to piece together a puzzle I didn't even know existed before. The way she sighed when she talked about her husband. The way she rolled her eyes. The way she described him as not enough in so many subtle ways. Back then, I thought she was just venting. Now it felt different. Now it felt like every complaint carried a kind of hidden justification. Like she was building a case, slowly, quietly, explaining why her actions were somehow acceptable. And that thought made me uncomfortable, because I didn't want to believe that people work like that. The next day at work, I saw her again. She was laughing with the group, just like always. Bright, cheerful, completely normal. If I hadn't known anything, I would have never guessed there was something like that hidden behind her smile. And for a second I wondered if I should just forget it. Maybe it wasn't my business. Maybe I was overthinking. But then she started talking again, complaining about her husband. Same tone, same frustration. He never notices anything I do. I feel like I'm talking to a wall. I swear, sometimes I feel like I'm alone in this marriage. Everyone nodded along, offering small comments, half sympathetic, half distracted. And I just sat there, silent. Because now, every word sounded different. It wasn't just a wife venting anymore. It felt like something distorted. I remember looking at her and thinking, does she even hear herself? Does she realize how this sounds? Or does it make perfect sense in her mind? That was the moment I felt it most clearly. That gap between me and everyone else in that room. Not physically, but mentally. Like we were living in two completely different versions of reality. Later that day, I ended up alone with the same coworker who had told me everything. I couldn't hold it in anymore. So, you really think that's understandable? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She looked at me, slightly surprised, but not defensive. It's not about right or wrong, she said. Life is more complicated than that. That answer irritated me more than I expected. Not because it was aggressive, but because it felt like it dismissed the entire issue. Complicated how? I asked. She paused for a second, like she was choosing her words carefully. Sometimes people stay in marriages for reasons you don't see. Pressure, family, expectations. Maybe she's unhappy. Maybe she feels trapped. I nodded slowly. I could understand that part. I really could. But then I asked the question that had been bothering me the most. Okay, but then why not leave? Why stay and do that? She didn't answer immediately. And in that silence, I felt something shift. Because for the first time, it seemed like even she didn't have a clear answer. Finally, she shrugged slightly. It's not that easy. That sentence. I've heard it so many times since then. It's not that easy. And maybe it's true. Maybe relationships are messy. Maybe emotions don't follow logic. Maybe people make choices that don't make sense from the outside. But even so, there was still something I couldn't accept. Because no matter how complicated something is, there are still lines, right? Or at least, I thought there were. The conversation ended there, but my mind didn't. Over the next few days, I started observing more. Not just A, everyone. The way people talked, the things they joked about, the small comments that usually go unnoticed. And I began to realize something unsettling. A situation wasn't being judged harshly, not because people didn't know it was wrong, but because they didn't see it as unusual. That's what scared me. It wasn't outrage. It wasn't shock. It was familiarity. Like this kind of story had existed around them long enough that it no longer triggered a strong reaction. And that made me question something deeper. Not just about A, but about the environment I was in. Is this normal in workplaces? Are these kinds of relationships more common than I thought? And if they are, does that mean people just accept them? Or worse, do they eventually start to justify them? One evening, on my way home, I found myself staring out the bus window, watching the city blur past. Lights flickering, people walking, lives moving in every direction. And I kept thinking about something simple. What kind of person do I want to be? Because in that moment, it felt like I was standing at a crossroads I didn't even realize existed. On one side, there was this idea that life is complicated, that nothing is black and white, that people make choices for reasons we can't always understand. On the other side, there was the version of me that still believed some things are just not okay. And I didn't know if holding on to that belief made me naive, or if letting go of it would mean losing something important. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of A, but because of what her story represented. A kind of gray area I had never stepped into before. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized. Maybe the real question wasn't whether I was right or wrong. Maybe the real question was, what happens to you when you start getting used to things you once thought were unacceptable? The next time I saw A, something inside me had already changed. Not outwardly. I still smiled. I still sat with the group. I still responded when she talked. But internally, it felt like there was a thin layer of distance now. Like I was watching everything from just a step outside the circle. And once you see something like that, you can't really unsee it. That day, she was quieter than usual. At first, I thought maybe she was just tired. But then, halfway through lunch, someone asked her a simple question. Are you okay? You seem off today. She hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. And then she sighed. It's nothing, just stuff at home. There it was again. The same story, the same narrative. But this time, I didn't hear it the same way. Stuff at home used to sound like something heavy, something deserving empathy. Now it felt like a script, something repeated so often that it had lost its meaning. Still, the group leaned in. What happened? Did you guys argue again? And just like that, she started talking. He's been distant lately. Doesn't really talk to me anymore. I don't even think he notices when I'm upset. Her voice cracked slightly. Not dramatically, but enough to make it feel real. And maybe it was real. That's the part that confused me the most. Because what if she was genuinely unhappy? What if her feelings were valid? But then, what about everything else? I sat there, listening, feeling this strange tension build inside me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even judgment exactly. It was conflict, because part of me still wanted to empathize with her. But another part of me couldn't ignore what I knew. And for the first time, I wondered, can someone be both a victim and the one causing harm at the same time? That question stayed in my head long after the conversation ended. Later that afternoon, something happened that I didn't expect, and I ended up alone together in the pantry area. It was one of those small, quiet spaces where conversations either stay surface level or suddenly become too real. For a moment, neither of us said anything. She was making coffee. I was pretending to check my phone. And then she spoke. Do you ever feel like you're not living the life you thought you would? The question caught me off guard. I looked up at her. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the cup in her hands. And suddenly, she didn't look like the same person who laughed loudly at lunch or casually complained about her husband. She looked tired. I didn't know how to answer. Sometimes, I said carefully. She nodded, like that was enough. It's weird, she continued softly. You think you know what you want. You think you made the right choices. And then one day, it just doesn't feel right anymore. There was a long pause. And in that moment, I felt something shift again. Because this wasn't gossip. This wasn't secondhand information. This was her, right in front of me. Human, conflicted, real. And for a second, I almost forgot everything else. But then she added one more sentence. Sometimes you just need something to make you feel alive again. That was it. She didn't explain. She didn't say anything directly. But she didn't need to. Because I understood. And the moment I did, that uncomfortable feeling came rushing back. Stronger than before. Because now, it wasn't just a story I heard. It was a mindset I was witnessing. I felt my chest tighten slightly. I wanted to say something. I wanted to ask her, is it worth it? Is it fair? Do you ever think about the people you're hurting? But I didn't. Because I realized something in that moment. She didn't see it the way I did. To her, this wasn't about betrayal. It was about survival, about feeling something missing, about escaping something that felt empty. And maybe that's why other people didn't react as strongly, because they weren't looking at it as a clear moral violation. They were looking at it as a response to pain. But even understanding that, I still couldn't accept it. And that was the moment everything became clear to me. Not about her, but about myself. I don't think I'm naive. I don't think I'm inexperienced in the way people assume. I think I just choose to draw my lines differently. Because yes, life is complicated. Yes, people get hurt. Yes, relationships can become suffocating. But I still believe there are choices you make before you reach that point. There are exits you take instead of dragging others into something broken. There are truths you face instead of hiding in something that feels easier. And if you cross those lines, then no amount of "it's complicated" can fully justify it. That evening, I went home with a strange sense of calm. Not because I had all the answers, but because I realized I didn't need to. I don't need to understand everything to know what I believe in. I don't need to agree with others to feel grounded in my own values. And maybe the world isn't as black and white as I once thought. But that doesn't mean I have to lose sight of what I think is right. So now I want to ask you something. If you were in my position, hearing this story, seeing it unfold in front of you, would you see it as just another complicated situation? Or would you feel the same way I did? Because honestly, I'm still trying to understand if I'm the one who's different. Or if I'm just someone who hasn't learned to look away yet. If this story made you think, or if you've ever faced something similar, I'd really want to hear your perspective. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to follow for more real, complicated moments that make you question everything.